In parts of the world where the rule of law is extremely lax, it's quite common for regions to be ruled by gangs, and for these gangs to kidnap people as a way of making money. The people they kidnap are usually tourists from other parts of the world, or although not necessarily. To protect yourself against being kidnapped, if you visit these places, you can pay the local gangs protection money, and they won't kidnap you. The amount that you pay in protection is much less than the amount that you would have to pay in ransom, or that your employer or family would have to pay. The gangs are apparently pretty good at keeping to their word on this. If you pay the protection money, you're actually very unlikely to get kidnapped. They won't renege on the negotiation. They'll stick to that promise of not kidnapping you, and you'll be able to operate in that region with relative safety. The reason I bring this up is because I was hearing about this recently, and I started to think about the government and the way that taxes are collected from the population to fund the government's activities. You've probably heard libertarians or anarchists say that taxation is theft, and I've said before on this channel that I don't really believe that's an accurate way of describing taxation. If taxation is theft, it's very different to every other instance of theft that we see in the real world. I think, to be more precise, you could say that taxation is more like a kidnapping racket, a protection racket. And in that way, you could call it extortion if you wanted to make it an even shorter expression. Taxation is more like extortion, is what I'm saying. By paying your taxes according to whatever amount the government tells you to pay, you are protecting yourself from the hired goons of the government, who are called the police, who will arrest you and take you to jail if you don't pay your taxes. One key difference between going to jail and kidnapping is that when you go to jail, it's actually quite difficult to bail yourself out with money. Of course, if you get a really good lawyer, perhaps you can spend money to get yourself out, and never get in the first place. But mostly, going to jail is you have to stay there until you've lived out your sentence. Sorry, I've been saying jail when I should really be saying prison. I can't speak for the conditions of a modern day prison in a first world country compared to the conditions that kidnapping victims are kept in these very lawless parts of the world. But I expect I'd rather go to a prison in my own country than to be kidnapped, to be honest. All other things being equal, of course. But still, I think there are a lot of people who would strongly disagree with comparing the system of government and taxation and prison sentences and justice, to comparing all of that to how gangs operate in lawless parts of the world, and kidnapping and protection money. I think most people would probably object to that analogy, or that definition at least. And I don't think they're wrong to be honest. And I suppose that's what this video is going to be about today. When I was a teenager and I first started to understand what taxes even were and think about the government and politics and all that sort of thing, I think my first mental model of taxation was that it fit into this cosmic justice kind of worldview that I had. It's a pretty simplistic idea of justice, where people who had a lot of money seemed to have an excess, and there were also people who did not have enough money, pretty obviously. In a country there was inequality, and since the very rich people were not using all of their money, or rather that they did not need all of that money, that it was therefore an act of justice to redistribute this wealth, so that the rich people wouldn't lose out very much, and the poor people would have a lot more to gain. Is a very utilitarian kind of view, although I didn't know that's what it was called at the time, obviously. So that was my first model of taxation, my first mental worldview of taxation that made sense to me. I really don't know how common that worldview is, but it's still something that I can relate to. It's not a completely alien concept to me. It does still make a kind of logical sense to me, but now that I'm older and I've done a little bit of research into economics, into politics, I've developed these other mental models alongside that one that I can kind of access at will, almost, just to, it's like those pictures with ambiguous information. Like, you've probably seen the one where you can see it as a rabbit with its head sideways, or you can see it as a duck with its head facing another way. I'll put a picture up of it, obviously. When you're given something to look at that's not exactly obvious, there's often a few different ways of interpreting it. And I don't know how common this is for other people, but for me it's not that hard to switch between the two worldviews. Just like you can look at the picture of the duck rabbit and you can't see both at the same time, but you can see one and then the other. You can make your mind see it as a duck and then see it as a rabbit. And both are, in the case of the picture, both are equally valid interpretations of the image, since the image was designed that way. It's not an image of a duck or a rabbit, it's an image of both. And what I wanted to do in this video is to hold up a picture for you, which is taxation. The government, in the way that the government collects taxes and punishes those who don't pay those taxes. I want to hold this up for you and ask you what you see. What do you see when you look at taxation? And not only that, but how easy is it for you to see these other ways of looking at it? How easy is it for you to switch your brain from looking at a duck to a rabbit in this scenario? I have to admit, I didn't do much research for this video. I just kind of racked my own brain to think of all the different ways that I could interpret taxation, or the ways that I've heard other people interpret the role of government in taxation. The first two views that I described were the extortion view and the utilitarian view. But I'm going to go into a few more here, just to fully explore the range of interpretations here. I think related to that utilitarian view is what I'll call the Robin Hood view.
I steal from the rich and give to the needy.
Takes away percentage.
But I'm not greedy.
It's similar to the utilitarian view, except that the people who are being taken from, that is the people making the most money, are actually immoral for making that money. They don't deserve that money because they've acquired it through nefarious means, through exploitation. It's sort of a more extreme view than the utilitarian one. The idea that the rich are the oppressors and the poor are the poor peasants of Nottingham who are being exploited, and who therefore should have the profits and the wealth of the rich. They are more deserving of that wealth than the rich are. It's kind of like a punishment for the rich, not just a dispassionate redistribution, but an actual punishment. The important thing here is that you don't get confused about the story of Robin Hood too much. The only thing you need to know about Robin Hood is that he steals from the rich and gives to the poor. The fact that the rich that he's stealing from is effectively the government in the legend, that's a somewhat confusing detail. So that's number 3, the Robin Hood view. Number 4 is I'd call it the pragmatic view. The idea that there are services that people require to be prosperous in a country that need to be paid for by the government, and the only way to possibly earn the income to pay for these services is through taxes. So things like roads, things that everybody uses either directly or they benefit from indirectly. The justice system is another good one. The law enforcement service of the police, the courts, prisons, those two things, the justice system and roads, are pretty much universal among countries that collect taxes. Those are things that are paid for by the government. But there's also things in addition to that a lot of countries either do or don't have, such as publicly funded schooling, publicly funded healthcare, things that everybody has a right to, that therefore everybody should pay for, so that it can be given out for free meaning at point of use. The consumer should not have to pay for the schools or for their healthcare if they can't afford it, or if they just don't want to pay for it, as is the case in the UK. If you believe that everybody is entitled to these things, then you may justify that you may use that as a justification for taxing everybody. Since everybody benefits from these services, then everybody should be charged a fee for living in a country that provides these services for free. So I'll call that the pragmatic view. Whether you think it's truly pragmatic or not is definitely interesting, but for now I just need to give it a name of some kind, so I'll call it that. So that was number 4, I think. And the 5th and final one that I'm going to describe here is the view that the country is like a big family, and that it is right that we should take care of each other. I suppose this could be related to the utilitarian view, but I'm going to keep it as its own separate one because it uses slightly different. It tugs on slightly different emotions. If we think about how a family pays for the meals that everybody eats and for the rent or the mortgage, the clothes that everybody wears in the family, it's not very capitalistic. There's usually a few people who are earning the money, who then pay for everything that I just mentioned, everything that the rest of the family needs. These needs are met by these few earners. In a family unit, it's not normal for children to let their elderly parents go hungry or to go homeless. And similarly, it's not normal for parents to let their children go hungry or homeless just because they're not pulling their own weight or something. Families broadly operated on the principle of from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And so if you wanted to look at a society, a country, as like a big family that is providing for people out of love, out of concern, compassion, then you might think of taxes as just a way of spreading out that love and that care. And by doing so, you will promote the cohesion of society, and you'll make the country more like a big family where everybody will love each other and we all take care of each other, and isn't that nice? So those are the 5 ways of thinking about taxes that I could think of, but if you can think of any more, then please let me know. And like I said, please let me know which one you can relate to the most. For me, I really couldn't say. I kind of resonate with all of these to some extent. And in that sense, I do wonder if you could call me a centrist for not aligning with any one particular political ideology in this case. I find it quite strange to think about how easy it is to think of the government as and more importantly than just which one you most resonate with. What I really am interested in finding out is how important is that narrative, how important is that worldview, and what does it even mean to believe in that worldview over the other, if you choose one over the other 4. Is it just a metaphor to help with a description in the same way that a science teacher might use tennis balls to demonstrate the activity of atoms? Or is it more of a firm belief that this is what taxation is? In other words, are we saying that X is like Y, or are we saying that X is X? Are we just giving a description of what we think taxation is? So, for instance, if we say that taxation is a protection racket, a kidnapping racket, are we saying that we should treat it exactly like that, or is it just a rhetorical device? Do we use these metaphors to help understand this thing to ourselves, or do we just use these metaphors to describe them to others? Is it possible to even understand what taxation is on a moral level without using some kind of metaphor for other behaviour that is a bit easier to grasp, is a little less abstract?
Ah, who are you? I'm an analogy for government.
Good analogy.
And when we argue with other people about these things, are we fundamentally arguing about this mental framework? Are we arguing about how to view taxation ethically so that we can then decide on what the tax rate should be for various classes of society, or how tax money should be spent, what services should be provided by the government? My question is, do these disagreements that we have in politics, could they all be said to be dictated by how we think of taxation, the government, how we mentally describe these things? I don't know. Sometimes I make these videos and I don't even know if I've said anything. Right? I mean, I've been talking for 40 minutes. I hope that it gets edited down, but I really don't know if I've said anything meaningful here. I hope I'll get some interesting responses back anyway, if my questions were coherent enough, even if my actual points were incoherent. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.
Taxes, taxes, taxes. Why, he taxed the heart and soul out of the poor people of Nottingham. If you couldn't pay your taxes, you went to jail. Yep, I'm in here too.